Good morning, folks. Hope everybody's relaxed after the Canada Day and the long weekend that everybody's enjoyed. I want to welcome all of you. My name is Bashir Fancy. I'm one of the founders and president of BIZTEK. And you're seeing on the screen Derek Lackey, who is an instrumental player, not only BIZTEK, but in the industry. And I'll tell you more about him because you are seeing us very busy on LinkedIn and many other areas talking about some of these key issues. So, quick background on Derek. Derek is the CEO of Newport Thompson, and he's also been the chairman at, he is in fact the chairman of Research Marketing Association in Canada. Derek's involvement in this, why he's qualified to speak on the subject of privacy, and I'll just give you a couple of examples. That he was the chair and led the Canadian Advisory Council on GDPR. He's been involved heavily on the privacy by design on ISO 31700. And as you go into, you'll find out he has been involved heavily on both privacy, security side, and coming from a marketing background. This is exactly what I've been talking about for a long time, that you need to understand both sides of the business. And Derek represents that. I could go a lot more as to why he's qualified, but let me assure you, he's amply qualified to speak on this subject. And we're going to have a conversation. We hopefully that will help you. And so let's start with, so good morning, Derek. Welcome to this session.
Good morning, Bashir. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm very happy and excited that you are here because I don't know of too many people who can speak on both sides as you can. So we have on the screen, right?
Just one little thing about that introduction. Thank you. On the Canadian Advisory Council for GDPR, I co-chaired a committee on guidance, a work group on guidance with Matthew McNeil, who is now with the CIO Council. So I didn't chair the whole group. I just chaired the work group on guidance.
I'm glad you clarified that.
Yeah.
But there's still, you're amply qualified. That part doesn't change. So that's the good. I'm really glad you did that.
Yes.
Now, you have put up the Privacy in Canada and the 10 Charter. Why don't you speak to it, then we can have the conversation after.
Yeah, so last May 2019, with great fanfare, Prime Minister Trudeau and Minister Baines announced the 10 principles of the Digital Charter. And here we are, 13 months out, and I thought it would be worthwhile to just take a look and just look back 13 months and what's happened between then and now. But let's start with what the Digital Charter was. So I'll just quickly walk you through. Universal access. All Canadians will have equal opportunity to participate in the digital world and the necessary tools to do so, including access, connectivity, literacy, and skills. I think if we have to rate each one of these as we go along, I would say this is a fail. Because we don't. There are many parts of Canada that are not connected. And I have to, well, I'll question further. I'll question further whether the actual internet is a safe place to be. Oh, here we go. Safety and security. Canada will be able to rely on the integrity, authenticity, and security of the services they use and should feel safe online. And I think given what's going on, there isn't any Canadians who truly feel safe online. Helpless might be a little better word, how we all feel online. But certainly safe isn't one of them. So again, on this one, I have to say a fail. Going control and consent. Canada will have control over what data they are sharing, who is using their personal data and for what purposes, and know that their privacy is protected. Well, that's not so at all, Bashir. That is, that's one of the bones of contention that the privacy professionals like myself have with the structure we PIPEDA in the year 2000. That's 20 years ago. And it's mind-boggling the leaps and bounds that technology has made in that 20 years. And we are not even close to keeping up. So this is a little bit of a dog's ear situation where, we're 100 years plus behind in our privacy framework. Given what technology has, how it has grown and allowed us to scrape massive amounts of data, do what we want with it, and somehow our ethical brain checked out when we realized we could. Nobody stopped to ask if we should. So I think it's kind of interesting, and I believed at the time I thought that the digital charter was the beginning of some movement from our government towards a model that actually worked. But here we are in July of 2020, and still no signs of any action. Lots of talk, though, and this was part of the talk. So the fourth principle of the digital charter was transparency, portability, and interoperability. And Canadians will have a clear and manageable access to their personal data and should be free to share or transfer it without undue burden. Again, that's not so. So if you're with one insurance company right now, there's no way they're transferring your data to a new insurance company if you make a new choice. Under these new regulations, that wouldn't be so. So if you look under GDPR has a section in there that that data must be kept in a universal way, that it is interchangeable, and it is one insurance company's obligation to send it to a new insurance company if that's my wish. So again, nice promise, but nothing's happened. Open and modern digital government. Canadians will be able to access modern digital services from the Government of Canada, which are secure and simple to use. I don't do that very often, but certainly, from what I understand, with this CERB that came up in COVID, they've done an excellent job of making it simple and easy. And so on this one, I would give them a good grade. Open and modern digital government. But I think from what Alex Benet says, we have a long way to go. A level playing field. The Government of Canada will ensure fair competition in the online marketplace to facilitate the growth of Canadian businesses and affirm Canada's leadership on digital and data innovation while protecting Canadian consumers from market abuses. That's a complete fail. We continue to watch Facebook and Google do as they please. GDPR is beginning to box them in, and I think you're going to see some significant fines this year under GDPR for both those organizations. The thing you have to understand with enforcement is it takes time. The Irish Data Protection Authority is in charge of most of those high-tech companies in Europe, and I believe they each have such a huge legal department that they are tying up the DPA, but it won't go on forever. The DPA has investigations open on both those organizations, and they have multiple investigations because there's breaches of the GDPR all over the place with both those organizations, and I think you're going to see some action. But meanwhile, back in Canada, we're still talking about it. We haven't done anything Even our law castle, which was passed in 2010, came into force partially in 2014, came into full force July 1st, 2017, with a set of recommended changes in December of 2017 that, in all honesty, I could have made those changes in a week. There were 13 recommendations for changes out of the Castle Review, and none of them significant. Clarifying a few definitions, renaming the act. For some reason, our government doesn't like the Canadian anti-spam legislation. They want to change it to the Electronic Protection Commerce Act, I believe. I'm not sure why, but if that's all that's slowing them down, go ahead, change the name. Let's get on with it. But let's have an enforceable law. So I don't think the playing field is very level right now. I think it's corporate 10, Canadian citizen 0. Our data rights are just being trampled upon, and we haven't done anything about it. Understand that we do have a law called PIPEDA, which is it's definitely got some of the elements required, but it's got no enforcement teeth. It's a best practices law, and the privacy commissioner, the federal privacy commissioner, does not have the power to fine or even demand compliance. Their solutions are long and arduous, and they're long court battles, and they just don't have an easy way to enforce. So, without the enforcement powers, actually, I would suggest that with enforcement powers, PIPEDA might not be bad, because it was pretty visionary when it was developed in 2000. It was based on Anne's Kavukian's work of privacy by design. So those principles were very much at play, and many of the data rights that were given to EU citizens under the GDPR were already in place here in Canada. They just weren't enforced. So I think enforcement's a big deal. Corporate America has proven they are not going to change their habit unless they have to. They are going to always fall in favor of the quarterly report and financial performance. Sorry, that's a very cynical perspective, but data and digital for good. The government of Canada will ensure that the ethical use of data to create value, promote openness, and improve the lives of people at home and around the world. Again, just nice words. No action attached to it. So, disappointed? Yeah. As a privacy professional, I'm very disappointed. I would have expected, with all the fanfare that this digital charter was introduced last May, that something would have happened in the following 13 months. Now, we will give an acknowledgement to this COVID period, but things just shouldn't take this long. Strong democracy. The government of Canada will defend freedoms of expression and protect against the online threats and disinformation designed to undermine the integrity of elections and democratic institutions. I would suggest that Canada does, as good a job as any other country. It's difficult to protect elections and democratic institutions in this cyber secure world, but I think that the hackers and the bad actors are getting harder and have many more great tools at their disposal, and are we've talked about this before with back in the day. I think you talked about dumb terminals, and I'll let you speak to that at some point, but yeah, again, I'd give them a solid B on this one. Free from hate and violent extremism, Canada can expect that digital platforms will not foster or disseminate hate, violent extremism, or criminal content. And again, we're not there. This is maybe giving us an indication or a hint at what the foundations of our new PEPITA might look like, but no signs of it anywhere soon. And then this one I almost have to laugh at. Strong enforcement and real accountability. There will be clear, meaningful penalties for violations of the laws and regulations that support these principles. I've written a book on Castle. It's really for marketers to understand Castle. And it's funny because the Castle had two enforcement levels to it. They had three bodies: the CRTC, the Competition Bureau, and the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. CRTC with main enforcement ability. Competition Bureau could use Castle to shut down any unfair competition situations. And the Office of the Privacy Commissioner was responsible for email harvesting, so scraping the internet or anything like that. That was their bailiwick. And then the if you will, the fourth element of enforcement under Castle was the private right of action. And it was clearly defined and outlined in a whole section. Section 47, I believe, of Castle is all about privacy by design. And it was due to come into force on July 1st, 2017. And 3 weeks, maybe less than that, June 7th, 2017, Minister Baines announced the indefinite postponement of the private right of action. And the concern was stated at the time that they were concerned for frivolous lawsuits against legitimate businesses. And there existed no proof at the time that would happen. I personally think that there wasn't enough awareness amongst consumers to actually have that result, but that's just my perspective. I'm not the minister of ISED. And that single move stopped the enforcement of Castle. So I want to be clear, since on June 12th, 2017, there was a fine to Mr. Halazon for $10,000. That was already well in the works and ready to announce by the time Minister Baines pulled the private right of action. So you can't even count the one for Halazon, because that really investigated and happened prior to June 7th. But since June 7th, there have been, aside from Mr. Halazon, there have been 4 either fines or violations under Castle administered by. So in 3 years, there have been 4 actions from CRTC. One was Black Lock Reporter, which didn't result in a fine. Another for 514 billets, which resulted in a $100,000 fine. Ancestry.com, which did not result in a fine. When I asked the enforcement team at CRTC why, they said that, and this is good news for most businesses. They said that Ancestry.com came to them and asked them if their unsubscribe mechanism met their measures, because in order to unsubscribe, you had to log into your account. And CRTC investigated it with them and said, absolutely not. It is, you cannot force people to log in to their account because they may not remember their password, and it's actually a deterrent for unsubscribes. So unsubscribes must be done in 2 clicks and be off the list within 2 weeks. Pretty simple. And Ancestry.com did not meet those measures. So they simply gave Ancestry.com an order to come into compliance with Castle within 6 months. And they were very cooperative. They threw themselves on their sword. So in all that, the CRTC, they've said their intent's not to be punitive. It's not to punish companies. It's to have companies come into compliance. That's their objective. And in the case of Ancestry.com, I would say they met their objective because they simply gave them an order to come into compliance and no fine. So they weren't being punitive. So that was encouraging, I think, for most companies. So, if you don't think you're Castle compliant, and, contact CRTC and they'll tell you what it takes to come into compliance. And if you don't want to throw yourself on the sword with the actual enforcement body, there's lots of other professionals who can help you come into compliance. Then the fourth fine was Data Blocks and Sunlight Media for a total of $250,000 between them. And that was actually a violation. So that's the only violation. The other three were undertakings. The Data Blocks and Sunlight Media was a violation. And so can you call Castle being enforced? One violation in 3 years with three undertakings in that period? Oh. The private right of action was the primary enforcement tool for CRTC. I watched them closely, and in the first 18 months of the law coming into force, July 1st, 2014 until December 2015, they were very active in producing guidance, and they gave many what we'll call let's call them sample fines. Rogers, Porter Airlines, Kellogg's. They gave a whole bunch of fines showing the rest of Canada what they were going to fine for. And I thought they did an exceptional job. They produced 7 or 8 guidance documents, which really clarified a whole bunch of little ambiguous spots in the law. And then as of January 2016, they switched into a mode I can best describe as negotiating international deals. So I believe they negotiated in that 12-month or 18-month period 12 different international deals. Their focus was very much there. They did have a couple of fines here and there, but it didn't seem to be their focus. Their focus seemed to be in that second 18-month period leading up to July 1st, 2017. And the private right of action was going to kick in. They were laying a great foundation for enforcement of Castle. And then on June 7th, the minister announced the indefinite postponement of the private right of action, and CRTC has gone pretty quiet. So, yeah.
Derek, you touched some very, very interesting, but you hit such an interesting and important point. We can start there, unless there's still more to cover.
No, please. That's
okay. Fantastic. So here's the question then. Given the fact what you just talked about, 2-3 things come to mind, and I would like to hear your views on that. One, if you look at recent situation with Tim Hortons, the app that they were putting out and collecting all sorts of information, right?
Yes.
I think the only difference between them and a lot of the other people is Tim Hortons got caught. I mean, when you
yes,
think about
the reporter from the National Post called them out.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly. And so what happens is, who else is doing it? And why are they doing it? Because they can get away with it. They're probably, I am sure, all these companies are big legal departments, because I do not believe anything happens just by accident. They've reviewed what the potential risks to them are. And I'll give you an example of why I say that. And so, what is your view on the fact that a lot of other people could be doing it too, right?
There's no question. So, we're an app-driven society, given our use of smartphones. And if you look at the terms of use and privacy policy of any of those apps, I think the hair on the back of your neck could stand up, because you bypass all that when you have an app. You're just trying to get to use the app, and there are just about every app developer takes advantage of that and slips a whole bunch of things in that's good for them, but not for you. The GDPR doesn't allow this now. The GDPR is saying if the consumer, so I love this. So when Google downloads Android, it takes about 87 consents bundled into I agree. And the test for the DPAs in Europe is to ask the consumer, did you understand that you agreed to these 87 things? And if they didn't understand that, they didn't, despite how well legally that those 87 consents are written,
Right.
under the GDPR, they are what's called purpose limitations, and Google is not free to do all of these things like they think they are. They are literally operating outside of the GDPR, and it's stuff like that, Bashir, that they're going to get fined for. So,
and that makes sense, because I think there is a fallacy to kind of think that industry will police itself. We've seen it too many times, right? In the credit card business, where we took a thumping. One of the challenge also, like I said, that the legal departments look at the stuff beforehand to make sure that what happens, and I've seen it with PCI,
yes,
where companies have called me and asked me, and I tell them why we put the standard together. What was the purpose of that? It was to protect the data. Don't take in data you don't need, and if you must to conduct that transaction, then after you complete it, either you delete it or you protect it in a manner with access and all that. Here, so the reason I bring it up is because they would call me and say, by the way, what's the worst penalty that they can get charged? Because you've got QSs out there that tell them this, that, and the other. So when a business leader, and I'm not talking about junior guys, I'm talking right up the top in the corner suite, when they think like that they can pay penalties and it'll be cheaper or better, is that happens when they don't understand why this is getting done, right?
Yeah.
What is the benefit? So we could take some blame in saying, well, when we rolled it out, did we really clearly tell them what the benefits were? And those things changed 20 years later. But the point I wanted to make is that we've now moved to a checklist approach, right? In compliance, ticking boxes, and ticking boxes does not work. Right?
Yeah. Already seeing it creep into the privacy compliance sector. It's a checkbox mentality rather than a one of integrity, of trying to honor the law and compliance and the right thing to do, right?
I mean, the biggest misnomer is that compliance equal to security, but if we get a chance, we'll bring it up later. But I think what the challenge now, one of the things you talked about is the fact that there were some good things. Here, Tim Horton, another example or issue that comes to mind, and you have pointed it out already, is that the privacy commissioner has kicked off an investigation. Very nice. But there is a problem. After the investigation is completed and they find them guilty, now what? What can the privacy commissioner do? Because he doesn't have the enforcement powers.
Well, 4 years down the road, after a long multiple levels of court, the commissioner does have the power to fine, but it's a very long, legal, arduous process. So there is a minimal level of enforcement ability from the privacy commissioner, but what he's been asking for several years now is like in many other parts of the world, even in California, the attorney general has the power to fine. He doesn't have to go to court and all this long, arduous process. He can just do his investigation and fine. And that's the way it operates in Europe with the DPAs. And that is really, it's literally a no-brainer. When you have somebody as smart about privacy and data protection as the Privacy Commissioner's office, they are clearly the ones to investigate and levy fines within a context. But we haven't given them that power. And it's crazy given what's going on and the speed at which breaches are happening and people's scams are going on online. Online's a terrible place. It's just not a very safe place.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. I think it was about 3 years ago, or maybe slightly less than that. We had put the paper together for the Privacy Commissioner, and I was in that meeting, as I'm sure you've been at many, and Daniel Terrien and a few of the other Privacy Commissioners were there. And you could see he's trying to do the right thing.
Yes.
He wants to do absolutely all the right thing by Canadians.
Yes.
But what came loud and clear, and you have also kind of emphasized that point, that he doesn't have the enforcement teeth. And you cannot have somebody who's responsible for that not have the enforcement teeth, because the companies are not stupid. If they can use your data, as you can see, I mean, Facebook, the whole revenue model is built on collecting your and my information and then selling it directly, indirectly, right?
Yes.
And they make a lot of ad money and so forth.
Yes.
So I think what bothers me, and maybe you can throw some light on this, in Europe, we know that through GDPR, the government don't take any nonsense, and they really crack down on the privacy. And why is that we can't do that here? What is the reason? What is the holdback here? Is it undue influence and cooperation on the government? What is it?
Yeah, for sure. So observation only. I'm not I'm not a political insider.
No.
Observation only. I think that in Europe, as they were developing, so remember the GDPR came out of a directive that had been in place for 20 years. So they had some experience, but why they made it a regulation instead of a directive was so that it was universal right across the EU. The directive basically gave a framework to each country to make their law, but it was like this. So, and the GDPR served one master. I think this is a very important point.
Okay.
And the one master was the EU citizens, the data subjects. And they never took their eye off that ball. And I believe in Canada, we are caught between providing for Canadian citizens and making Canadian businesses happy. And there's a real dichotomy there. There's a real fight going on between those two things. And I believe the second thing at work, just again, an observation on my part, are we more interested in perfection than we are progress? And by that I mean, we'll never get this perfect, Bashir. We will never get this perfect. But we have to make progress. And 20 years without an update to our privacy law and strong enforcement given what's going on today is just not acceptable. It's just not acceptable. So progress over perfection, absolutely, in a case like this. Like base your decisions today on what we know today and can reasonably see in the future, and get on with it. But to do nothing is absolutely more damaging than to get it wrong.
This is actually very interesting. We have a precedent. There's a couple of things, point I'd like to get in here, your views. One is we have a precedent from the cell phone industry or telephones, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Is that if you go back, if you were to change your phone from Bell to Rogers or Telus or whoever, right?
Yes.
For providing service.
Yes.
You lost that number, right?
Yes, I remember.
So that law was changed to make the number portability that the number belongs to you for life, right?
Correct.
No telephone company can hold you ransom. If you want to break your contract and you pay your penalty, whatever, because they give you free phone, I understand that.
Yep.
But the number went with you. Now,
Correct.
there was a lot of hullabaloo, but anyway, it got done, right?
Yep.
What is the difference between you owning your number and staying with you for life and your personal data, which really belongs to you? Why can't it receive equal protection to say it's yours? If you choose not to share with the other people, it's your decision, right?
Yes.
But they are not in here because if we are talking about two masters, one is the Canadian citizen whose information it is, but it can only be one master. The
Yeah.
corporations don't own my data. They can't have unless I agree to give it to them.
Actually,
right?
in the context of how we've operated, they have been operating on the basis that they own the data they collect. So if you look at the mindset of businesses for the last 20 years, since the real massive data collection's gone on, I believe they act like they own the data, and we're beginning now to clarify that no, the data belongs to the individual, and you must seek permission. We're moving there, but it seems in Canada we're moving there very slowly. We've done a lot of talking about it, and this digital charter, while really nice on paper, unless it's employed, unless it's deployed, we it's like it's just like it's hooey. What how else can we describe it?
Right.
It's just like nice words.
We have created a default standard, and I give you a very good, powerful example. In the credit card business, right? Credit debit, we had rules in place.
Yep.
Globally. We had rules in place about how you would use the credit card information to store the data, but we never enforced them. So we were guilty of not doing that. The merchants didn't take care of that, whether you're a big store. If you wind back the clock and you lost your receipt and you went to a big retail store, they would ask you even 6-9 months later to say, do you have your credit card number? And you give it to them, they would punch it in, your entire thing would come up because they had indexed the record on
Their POS system. Yeah.
Correct. So the way it worked was actually that, but on the POS system, correct. That's what forced us to come out with AIS. So we had at Visa, operating regulations, the banks were required, merchants were required, but nobody followed that. They were storing all that. Reason why we didn't kind of create any challenge out there is because it didn't cost us any fraud, right? Because people had it in shoe boxes, and you had here, big companies had the data, but nobody was attacking them because the way the systems worked back then, you didn't have internet operating the way it does now. So now the online access kicks in, and we have all sorts of fraud problems, which forced us to then write the AIS DSS, which the world knows as PCI DSS is a Visa standard. So why did we do that? And I keep reminding people because people are ticking boxes. I'm saying it was to protect the data, right? To prevent the abuse, the data breaches that we see left, right, and center happening every day. A lot of them don't even get reported. Is that it's costing a lot of money. The second part of the problem to that is that the corporations made fraud as a cost of doing business, which is not true, because we had done reviews for a few years and we found for every dollar of fraud, there was a $10 of cost. Every dollar of fraud, $10 of cost. So why did the corporate world not see that? Because they're buried. They're buried all over the corporations in different budget center, customer service. When you go back and forth, you challenge your merchant, you didn't do the transaction, there was a request for copy and chargeback process and all that. So what would happen? Or a lot of them got even written off as credit losses because, you send out a statement, to an address that never existed. It was actually fraud. So after a while, you hand it over to a credit collection agency. It gets written off as fraud when it never was a credit loss. It was actually a fraud. So I think all this thing put together led to us getting forced to do this thing, right? Because where the fraud was totally out of it. Now, the other reason you don't see in the corporate world, and I think it ties into privacy as well, is that the cost is buried all over the place. We don't do zero-based budgeting to go back. We look at last year's numbers, and you plus or minus inflationary and whatever project you're doing, and that's your new budget. So inefficiencies, incompetencies, all whatever you want to call it, are buried all over the place, right?
Right, they roll over. Yeah,
they roll over. We've created empires in there, so you got duplications going on. People don't even see that. So now because I've always believed you can't have privacy without security, and you can't have security without privacy, because although the one is setting the rules and standards and whatever, the other one is actually enforcing.
Two sides of the same coin.
Yep. Same coin. And so what is happening, if you look at now, when you look at the Tim Hortons of the world or whoever, to be fair, they're not the only ones doing it, but they would now look at it and saying they're taking a hit. Their brand is taking a hit right now. Are they thinking like they're saying, yeah, we'll take a hit on the short term, but we'll make so much money in doing this thing that we can overcome this? Is that the thought process? I don't know. And I don't want to put words in their mouth or anybody else's for that matter.
Yeah, we would need to talk to them. We would need to talk to the marketing folks or the C-level folks at Restaurant Brands International to understand their thinking. But from what I can tell from the outside, the changes in Tim Hortons since the takeover from Restaurant Brands International, it is answering to Wall Street. Period. There is all the local homegrown stuff that when Ron Joyce owned it, and he ran a tight ship, and he ran a good ship, and he understood what Canadians wanted. This large American company, Restaurant Brands International, it's all about the bottom line. They're from what I understand, their Burger King marketing director is hailed as being a very creative and innovative guy. They may have seen this because they may have seen this opportunity with their loyalty card as being pretty clever marketing. I don't particularly, being a marketer, I don't think it's pretty clever marketing at all.
No,
because it's breaking that trust with your customer, and if you truly are customer centric, like all good marketing should be, abusing their privacy, it's not cool. I mean, the brand damage is, and in all honesty, with the problems they've had with their franchisees and a whole bunch of other things, Tim Hortons has the shine's been off their brand for a few years now.
Yes.
And this isn't going to help. This for sure isn't going to help. And this should probably stay in the news for a while, because with the one good thing of the privacy commissioner actually investigating it is it could stay in the news.
It's very interesting where you just took it, because in the credit card business, or debit card business, you turn around and talk about the fact that data is an asset and a liability. Yep. In Tim Hortons' case, you keep the data to conduct that transaction, and once it's done, keeping that type of information can only potentially get compromised, because what are you going to do? Come to me and send me a coupon to have a coffee free?
New world.
Well, yeah, but you don't need that personal information, right?
You're right. And companies have to start thinking. There aren't many companies that we've dealt with to put in privacy programs and therefore security programs. That when I asked, what's your retention period for data? They looked at me like, what do you mean? People don't throw data away. It's like we used to be with CDs. You never threw one in the garbage.
It's the culture. Right?
It is. It's like something up here is like we might need that sometime, so we don't delete it, right?
Absolutely.
And I'm amazed. I had this one online e-commerce company that dealt globally, and they've been in existence for 20 years and are very successful. And I said, what's your retention policy? He said, we have data from transactions from 20 years ago. I said, why? He said, we just never developed policies to delete it. I said, even the Revenue Canada only asks you to keep it for 7 years.
Yeah,
what's
exactly.
what's the purpose of keeping it any longer than that? Yeah. So and one of the things I do love about the GDPR, and I believe if we ever get around to revising Pepita here, is there is a not only purpose limitation, but there is a you have to have a data retention strategy. So part of any capturing any data is knowing when you're going to delete it, how long you're going to keep it for, and for what purpose. So they boxed it in very well under the GDPR. And I think that, I've watched our policy team at ISED. They're very smart people, and they understand privacy very well. And they've worked with the folks in the EU, and they've worked with the folks in California, and they really understand all the issues. There isn't that team, the policy team in ISED, is very good, and they're very up to date. I think we just need the political will to let them loose and let them write a law. They know what they're doing. They would write a good law if you empowered them and gave them the runway to do it.
I think what we'll do, because this is a very important point you just made, and if we are nothing, if we're not fair, we're nothing. We have always been very fair, and what we will do is hopefully we will sincerely hope that the minister or his deputy may want to respond to some of his things here.
Oh, I would love it.
To say, by the way, we are working, we've taken this very seriously, and perhaps we're not aware of some of the things they're doing, and saying, here's what we're doing. And we got waylaid by COVID-19 crisis, as you quite rightly pointed. And that would be fantastic to hear that, because then we can do our part to educate people, because that's where we are. And we want to make sure that we don't look at, but there's another part, the corporate world. So government part in policy is one thing, but whatever happened to doing the right thing? And now I'm talking about the corporate world. There is such a thing as doing the right thing. There are a lot of things we can do, but we don't do that because they would not be right. And we need to see that happen. That just because corporate world can get away with it, like, yeah, you start with Facebook and Google's and whoever, but go down. Now, you mentioned something which is correct. I've been harping about this thing, is that when we came through this rank and we never saw the fraud problem, is because the terminals we used to have were dumb terminals. Now, what I'm about to say, the big companies who are selling hardware and software big time, they're not going to like it. But if they're smart, they would look at it and go forward. It could help them too. What I'm talking about is actually dumb terminals. And you can, there are software and there are systems out there, even using USB key, that'll bypass your entire computer system, right? To allow you to talk to the company directly. In the old days, we used to image the laptop and PCs and give it to the employee. Now you can do it the other way, which really means that you are completely and fully aware, as I am, of what transaction I conducted with your organization, right? Because I'm talking to you through, there's no application, all these millions of apps we're talking about, they don't come into play at all, because you don't need them. You're talking to the company through URL. That means the company now has complete information on me. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I'm doing business with them and I know whatever, but that's it.
Yep.
The minute I cut that out, they have no clue what the hell I did. Like Tim, what happened with Tim Hortons would not happen. because it's really a dumb terminal. And for anybody who turns and says, "Oh, no, that's a crazy idea," well, let me remind people: Chromebook from Google is exactly that. There is no hard drive.
Right.
You're getting into Google and then doing all the stuff there and storing it on the Google Drive and whatever. So the concept is not a bad one. Okay, when you think about it, the question then becomes: when they get the information, if they're not selling it to other people, right? That's a very good thing. Then you have a relationship with them. You could even perhaps go buy things through them, but the information is not going to get sold to anybody. They'll know I bought it. So if the companies want to send me a coupon or whatever, but effectively my data cannot be tracked and stored. You don't need to know what the heck I'm doing. We have said in the government has agreed that the medical record belongs to me and the hospital or the doctor, right? But he can't do anything without my authorization, right? Because I own that data. Why can't we do the same thing here, but go to the dumb terminal, which even means dumb phones? But this is where the problem starts. That obviously the governments around the world, some of them who have been using that information, right? They probably go, no, we don't like this concept because they want the information. And I think we need to turn the table on this and say, no, you don't need this information. This is my personal information. It's just like no different than when there was a piece of paper. Unless I sent you a document, you had no clue what the heck I did or didn't do. So we need to rethink about what the government needs, which they do need information, no question about it, is to have that type of information. Right?
Yeah, it's complex. Like I just read yesterday that the under the GDPR, the courts in Europe have ruled against the use of drones by the police because it's deemed surveillance, right?
Exactly.
CCTV. There's a huge problem in parts of the world with CCTV where there's cameras everywhere, and that people haven't consented to that. So yeah, some slippery slopes for sure. It's stuff like this, I think, Bashir, that is freezing the government. Right? It's these complex issues like this that's helping to have no action, but that's costing us. That no action, I believe, is costing us. Like every Canadian every day, because we're not safe online. Our data is not safe online.
I was smiling because when you said something, it's complex. I agree, and I keep reminding people. I used to head risk management for Visa, right? And I was also the global head for Visa. And one of the things I learned in my role is, unlike a lot of people, risk management is not about not doing business. I keep telling people that if you're worried about risk, then sit at home and pack up. Because that's risk. That's why it's called risk management, is to turn around and see how you can do it securely. You have done a lot of things. I've done a lot of things with that mindset, saying, how can we do things better, more secure, protecting people? Can I ever turn around and say to people that, no, you're 100% secure? No, you can't. Yeah. You do the best. You do everything to mitigate, and the minute you do that, you are lowering the residual risks and so forth. What I think there's a reluctance right now is the mindset. But if anybody is serious and they're listening to this conversation or any other, you better start to think about the fact that the world has changed with COVID-19. People who are going to win this game going forward, and Canada can become leader. If we only now put our mind to it and say, all right, what do we do this going forward? Do we protect the Canadian citizens, their privacy, and we understand what legitimate needs for the corporate world is, and there are, and balance that so that at the end of the day, unless I agree, you can't have it. You know how ridiculous it is? You've got 10 ministries or how many ministries, all have got their mainframe and the data that they store on you and me. And I keep reminding people, and the word shared services is also abused. And they said, no, that's not shared services. You were born on the same day, you live at the same address, so do I. But my record in entirety exists in God knows how many places. And what that does, it creates more areas for the bad guys to attack, right? creates more areas for people to protect. And so
Yep.
the privacy of information is one of them that actually suffers that because you got too much information out there, and now you have to protect it, and it gets costly, and you have to educate people all along the way because one weakest link and you got a bigger problem. If you
Yeah,
look at
that's very good. When it exists out there as little bits all over that aren't connected, nobody
correct,
cares. What people aren't realizing is that with the computing power that we have today,
yep,
and will have even more so in 10 years from now,
right,
the ability to pull that together and own a single robust profile on an individual, like if you look at what Google and Facebook know about every individual they have on file, it is frightening.
yes,
It's
absolutely.
frightening. And it allows for companies like Cambridge Analytica and legitimate businesses to abuse that, to use that data without consent. And and I think that unless we have robust laws with powerful enforcement that deters that behavior, we get what we got.
So if I was to now step back and think some of the discussion and you pointed out some very good stuff here, is that we need laws to really be meaningful, effective, enforceable, right? One
Yeah.
part.
Yes.
There is a second part for the corporate world is to behave in a manner that says, okay, I don't care if the law is not there. I will do the right thing because my customer is the most important. We hear the word technology and I go, no, technology is not most important. It's your people. If you put people first, then technology in the process, like we've said many times, people, technology and process are getting aligned. So you can make your customer number one and do all the things. So that's number two, where the corporate world says, okay, I'm going to do the right thing, regardless whether law is there or not, then law catches up. The third part, which we have a big problem with today, is the awareness and education, right? Is that there is lack of either awareness and there's also lack of education because what we have done through colleges and universities and we produce is not their fault either, is that you produce people, as I call the multiple choice questions, the multiple choice answers, right?
Yeah.
We are
Yes.
not dealing in the world that's got multiple choices. Now you have a different problem. And unless you are a problem solver, you think differently and you have to understand. That's why I keep harping. People must have heard me say it thousands of times that get to the root causes. What is the root cause of this problem? And if you understand that, it's very easy to start now coming up with solutions as opposed to just, the piecemeal addressing band-aid solutions, which we see quite a lot. And you see that in the security world. The reason why security is not working well is because we've got tools left, right, and center. And I mentioned earlier uh, that I will edit out, but while we were having this conversation, I got two calls. One was CRA threatening to arrest me, which we know the call was coming from India. And the other one was duck cleaning. And I'm saying, it doesn't matter which country the call came from. How did people get my information, right? There was
Yeah.
a process that the government put out saying, go register on this list and say you want your privacy and you get blocked. I'm almost wondering if that list itself got sold to somebody, right? Because,
Oh, that's a ripe list. That
right,
is a ripe list. And a lot of the bad actors use that list because they know that those people don't get many offside calls. But I will give the CRTC one thing on this
right,
front, is they are very busy enforcing the Telecommunication Act.
right. That's true. I
So,
agree.
so their attention's not been on Castle with email, but it definitely has been. If you go on their site and look at their enforcement undertaken in violations, they have been very busy finding many companies. I know SiriusXM a couple years ago got fined $600,000 for um, abusing the teleconference laws, and I see legitimate brands on those lists because in order to find Castle fines, I have to actually sift through all of the telecommunications fines, and there are lots of them. The CRTC is doing a good job, a decent job on that front, but it's hard to do with these international ones, right? So, we still get some of it, but they just recently announced that you can't. It's against the law against the CRTC law or the Telecommunications Act to disguise the number. So you can't in any way disguise the number coming through on call display. That's a big deal.
Yeah, spoofing.
That's gonna really help them with enforcement. So, even little things like our teleconference laws, they're making progress. But for some reason, our privacy and anti-spam are not.
And that
there's more than ample proof that Castle works. Now, if it was just enforced, it would just go up again. Canada went from being in the middle of the pack for open rates on email that within 5 years of Castle being enforced, we in Australia are two of the highest open rate countries in the world. And it's no coincidence. We have tougher consent laws for sending email, right? Even though they're not being enforced, the laws being on the books and the perception being, oh, you can't email Canadians without consent, is at least helping. We've reduced the amount of spam, and we've actually created a better trust factor for people opening their inbox. So it does work. And if we just enforced it the way it was designed with the private right of action, I think email would be a very safe and useful tool. We were heading down a path before Castle came along. We were heading down a path where email was going to be like completely useless to marketers because nobody will check their email. They just don't trust it.
Yeah, and
they literally abandon their email addresses.
Yeah, if we're not careful, we might go back there again. I think this has actually been a very fabulous discussion. We'll do more on different topics.
I look forward to it.
And I think there are four key things here. And the last message I would leave behind, and you can add it, is that we're not saying you government bad. We're not saying you corporate world bad.
Oh gosh,
you
no.
Customer bad or you supplier. What we are saying, each of these entities, government, business, individuals who have to take responsibility, also suppliers of hardware, software, everybody has a role to play, because at the end of the day, if we're not careful, we will undermine this, which is a good thing.
Actually, if I may, I think the business world in general are looking at this issue incorrectly. They're looking at it as an inconvenience, and they got to change all of their practices. But if they realized how much they were investing in cybersecurity by not having a regulated platform, level playing field for all of us, that there's going to be a transition period where, they're going to have to invest in cybersecurity and changes to privacy and data protection laws. But at the end of that, there's going to be a lot less invested in cybersecurity. So I think for businesses, it's actually in their favor to encourage these laws and abide by them, because it is a level playing field for all. And it shuts down some of these bad actors.
This actually says also, given the fact that both US has got significant amount of unemployed, but so does Canada, and where the world has changed, that it is time to step back, rethink. We've outsourced a lot of stuff. Bring some of the things back. You can do, right?
That's the need for our Future of Business and Technology conference on July 29th.
Correct. So that actually exactly where it's going is that to people who are listening, please spend the day with us on July 29th. You're not going to be paying anything. We have made sure, thanks to ESI Technologies helping us, you'll get this chance to listen to some Canada's leaders who are founders and very perceptive. You may have heard a little bit of some of the things they've said, and just you'll hear them. Then you'll have privacy, security, AI, compliance, risk management, internal audit panels that will actually drill down how things need to be done going forward. And
yeah, love it. Yeah.
the biggest mistake people will do is think that things are going to be going back to normal. Yes, going back to new normal. And we posted an article on our website that you know too well. In fact, you brought it up. Is the one about Tesco, right? The reporters are talking about the recession that appears like they are talking about Europe, but we don't live in an island. We are not in an isolated world. All those things can happen and probably will happen. So what do you do going forward where you protect yourself, protect your business? And I think people will hear some very interesting things that could be eye openers for them and saying, me, because the future will be entrepreneurs, right? The big companies, I don't see the big companies creating jobs.